Yes, as Damien said, I'm an architect with the Office of Public Works, which is a government department. It's a really interesting time right now to be in the OPW. We're going through a lot of changes. Sorry. We're going through a lot of changes in the OPW at the moment. We could be quite a different organisation in a month or two. But it's also a time where BIM will facilitate those changes, I think, in a very useful way. I have to say, unlike Terry and Karen, the changes are not top-down BIM-driven changes, but I think BIM will facilitate those changes. I think there's going to be a very good match between the OPW and BIM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run quickly through the structure, the organisation of the OPW, and where I think BIM will slot into that very neatly. And then quickly at the end, I'll show you a couple of case studies where BIM has been very useful to us personally in the architectural section in driving efficiencies and producing, we think, better buildings, or at least working more efficiently. So, where am I? Okay, thanks. Great, okay. And is this next forward? No?
Oh, it's on the last.
Ah. There we go. So this is the OPW. We are the organisation responsible for all state property, all government departments, for procuring buildings for them and managing them. We have branches all over the country in all the regions. The large slide there is our headquarters in Trim. The smaller one, top left, is our branch in Dublin, where I'm based. And because we have so many buildings to manage and maintain, we are very interested in any systems that will help us manage and collect the data more efficiently. So of all the government agencies, probably the OPW is the one with most interest in developing BIM systems. There's quite a high level of awareness in BIM at the moment, in the OPW in BIM. I've travelled to the regional offices, Dublin, Galway, Trim, Cork, doing CPD presentations on BIM, and there's been really good attendance. People have come from remoter corners to see it, so there's quite a large interest. But I have to say we're very early days now. Compared to where Terry is at with the Ministry of Justice, we are really in the early stages. But seeds have been sown, and they are starting to develop. Apart from the level of awareness, our IT people, for example, have spent a lot of money, scarce resources at these times, in BIM technology, in upgrading all our machines to take BIM programs. And just before Christmas, they spent $500,000 on upgrading all our licenses from CAD to BIM licenses. So there is a great interest and an awareness within the organisation about BIM. All I'm offering today, though, is a snapshot of that. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Irish government. I'm not even speaking really on behalf of the OPW, more just my little section in the architects department. So if you look at where we are, the OPW, we are a subsection of the Department of Finance, but I like to think of us as being at the centre of all the government departments that we service. Though they might say we're surrounded by them. But first, the Department of Arts and Heritage, for example, we do lots of museums. We've done Coast Guard stations for agriculture and marine. That's a state laboratory for the agriculture people. Flood relief, we do a certain amount of that with Karen. We manage this Phoenix Park, Stephen's Green. Social protection, we do all the social welfare offices. We do the zoo, Leinster House, and all the stone buildings around, as well as what are now civil wedding venues like Casino at Marina, Newgrange, Cage of Fields. Of course, we have Orison Rookthorn as one of ours. We do schools for the Department of Education, and the Department of Justice. We do courts and Garda stations. So I'll come back to the courts in a moment. I'll show you that as a case study. But mostly we do this. It's run-of-the-mill office block accommodation to accommodate civil servants. which is probably where Terry's approach of BIM, of this sort of pack of ready-made elements, will come in most useful. It's not that easy to align the toolbox with the other things that tend to need more bespoke solution to a lot of our assets. So this is us surrounded by our departments, and there's hardly any one of them that wouldn't actually benefit from using BIM. But the way we manage that information about all these assets is about to change, and the reason for that is that, like Karen said, there's an awful lot of information we have, and a lot of our client departments have, but it's not coordinated or hasn't been up to now. So the government launched a new property asset management plan called Accommodating Change, Measuring Success. And it arose because of perceived deficiencies that have been recorded in property asset-related information across the civil and public service. So like Karen had found, we found that there had been difficulties in establishing an accurate baseline of information because there were inconsistencies in the way property-related data was collected. And the government plan is to standardise that by adopting an EU standard, EN 15-22-1. So from now on, which will mean that in future, all our client departments there will measure what they have under standard, European standards for classification of facilities, the assets, the measurement of the spaces, which is really important. No one was ever consistently measuring exactly how much area we had of anything. And the standards will apply to developing the management of the process and quality. So again, I think there's great synergies between BIM and this new approach that we're going to take, particularly because all this data, according to the plan, is to be managed by a web-based map register, which will show the core data. And I think that's where BIM will really come into the picture. So if we're to look at more internally within the OPW and where BIM might fit into its structure, this is the way the OPW is structured at the moment. We used to be called the Board of Works, and it still is at the core a board, which is the chairman and her two commissioners. We're actually called the Commissioners of Public Works. So in a sense, one of our main titles is to commission work rather than manage things. But the business units then that surround the chairman and her commissioners all feed into them. And I think there's hardly a single one of those that doesn't or can't benefit from some sort of a BIM process. Either the project information assets or the built information assets. If you take the architecture at the top there, the engineers, M&E, quantity surveyors, flood and maintenance, they would all benefit from developing BIM models. And obviously the people then on the left, the facilities management people, the project management accounts and corporation, would all benefit from the information that's in the model. And of course IT are very keen on BIM already. So BIM fits in very well with the way we are structured. And in fact that diagram often reminds me of this one, where BIM is at the centre and everyone's collaborating with each other around feeding in and feeding out of the central BIM model. It's not quite that simple in the OPW. The chairman has made this diagram where the way she sees all those business units. Basically, she's structured all the units that are to do with procuring and designing the buildings there on the left, and all the units to do with the management of the units on the right. And you can see where the professional and technical services, just us architects and engineers, are. We're not really part of either of those groups. We're outside of them, feeding into them from the top and from the bottom. So in some senses, we're quite peripheral to the core of the OPW business. But the important thing in this diagram is that green square in the middle there. It's the estate portfolio information system. Now that is that web-based mapping register in future from now on. So if you essentially what the chairman is envisaging is this, that the whole organisation will be run by a BIM core, this database. And I've added those green arrows there to show that the architects and engineers could feed into that model quite effectively, which could be drawn on then by the administration people. So BIM will be at the hub and all the collaborators working together. So this central database seems to me the single biggest opportunity for BIM adoption in the OPW, and that will happen in the coming year. So that's the opportunity. However, if you look at how the OPW is actually structured, this shows the proportions of each business unit within the whole. And I know I've been talking about opportunities, but in fairness, we have to look at threats as well. This talk is sort of a SWOT analysis. The thing is that BIM awareness in the OPW has really only entered it through the door of the people who have been using CAD heretofore, which are really only the technical professional people, which are the yellow, the green, and the maroon bits of the map there. As you can see, we're outnumbered by everybody else. So if there's a weakness in BIM adoption, it's that we're numerically weak. But we do punch above our weight, and we do have a certain amount of influence. So I think that mightn't be too big an issue. So just going forward, before I look at the case studies, I think the two big drivers of BIM adoption in the OPW are these two big reviews that are happening within the OPW at the moment, and they offer the most opportunities for BIM to become a standard system. First is we're reviewing all our AutoCAD strategies at the moment, and the second is this crowd called Concerto, who are doing a root and branch investigation, or in report on how the OPW is run. Now, we're completely reassessing our CAD standards at the moment. There's something like 200 CAD licenses in the OPW, but we have had, like Karen, there haven't been great universally consistent, shall we say, CAD standards throughout the organisation. There's licenses that are not being used, and so the review is to see how we're going to use these assets to drive much value from the product. And I think this is where the BIM opportunity really arises. Because up to now, say the engineers have had different CAD standards to the architects in Trim have gone in a different way to the architects in Dublin. But we're upgrading to AutoCAD 15. And the thing is, you can't buy that on its own anymore. It's bundled in with Revit. So effectively, everybody's going up to Revit now. So this is where we see the opportunity. We're going to leave behind all these inconsistent CAD standards, and in future, as people migrate from CAD to BIM to Revit, they will be adopting across the organisation BIM standard. So the old inconsistencies will be, we hope, ironed out, and this is a big opportunity here for some sort of a consistent approach across the organisation. And the other big change that's happening is the Concerto report, which isn't out yet, so we don't actually know what's in it, but it's almost certainly going to change the whole way we think about ourselves, the way we organise ourselves, the way we deal with our clients. And it is, of course, going to be based around this database, the register. So I think whatever Concerto recommend and whatever changes come in the OPW, BIM is going to be one of the great facilitators of those changes and will be embraced by it. So just quick two case studies. This is more personal rather than the big picture of where we are in the OPW. I'm going to look at two case studies. One where it was done entirely through CAD and the other was done entirely through BIM, and just show you where I personally found enormous benefits through adopting BIM. Oops, I'll just go back. I'm going to look at two courthouses. And this is a circulation diagram of a typical courthouse. Essentially, there's 5 different users who must circulate throughout the building and never meet each other at all, as Terry mentioned, except in the courtroom. So we don't want prisoners stabbing judges or jury being bribed by the public or anything like that. So in the centre, in the red box there, are the 4 courtrooms. And as you can see, there's a lot of little humpback bridges. Because it's almost impossible to describe the circulation in 2 dimensions, that somebody is always circulating over someone or circulating under somebody in a courtroom circulation. So in reality, it's more accurate to describe it like this. So when I was offered the opportunity to use a Revit package or a 3D package to design a courthouse, I just jumped at it. It seemed like it's such a no-brainer because it's such a 3-dimensional design process, court design. So these are the 2 courthouses, Kilkenny and Waterford. They're both quite similar in that they are historic, national, significant properties with a large extension out the back, and both in sensitive urban locations as well. So again, I sort of envy Terry in that he has this kit of parts that he can drop on a greenfield site, but it's not that easy when you have a sensitive urban environment to use something you designed earlier. But that said, we did still find BIM very useful. This is Kilkenny on the left and Waterford on the right, quite similar. Both two courtroom buildings with a large extension to the rear. But whereas if we wanted to describe that circulation in colour through CAD, we would have to do complicated polylines and hatching and all that to show what colour, which were the jury, which was the judges and all that. Whereas when we were doing it in Revit, we found simply by naming a room public or naming it staff, it automatically turned yellow or it automatically turned blue. It's just little things like that we first bought into it as being a really useful way to proceed. And a lot of labour saving, a lot of time saving. But it was the literal modelling that was really useful. For Kilkenny, we made cardboard models, made photographs of them, tried to examine the implications on the urban landscape of how our building was going to affect it and fit into it. Whereas when we were doing Waterford, we were able to produce really quickly these 3D models and see what effect we were having. And then saved a lot of time, and they were rendered quite quickly. I should say in Kilkenny, we weren't entirely doing CAD, we used SketchUp. It was, in fact, it was the first time anyone had used SketchUp in the OPW. At the time, we thought it was brilliant. I mean, it still is good. But we only ever used it to model the really tricky bits, how new bits were going to fit in with old bits and examine those in 3 dimensions. So it never occurred to us to model up the entire building. Whereas working in Waterford, we had the model to start with anyway. It was sort of by default. It was really easy just to take slices through it and examine all the tricky bits, the complicated interfaces, anywhere we wanted by any sort of a slice. So it made us more confident that the design we were doing was working. And this is something else that we've never even contemplated before, was in Waterford we had the time and the luxury to look at 2 completely different ways of designing the central space, as a square or as a circle. Now, the workload we have then and now, we'd never have had the time to stop and look at it in the amount of detail that we were able to do when we had the model. And in Kilkenny, these are the main public concourse space. We spent a lot of time in Kilkenny trying to get that right. We modelled it in SketchUp and looked at it from all sorts of angles, but we didn't really know how it was going to work or how the light was going to work on it until it was actually built. And that's that photograph on the bottom left there. Whereas with a similar space there on the right in Waterford, we have a fairly shrewd notion already what it's going to look like and what the central spaces are going to look like. And these images, we were able to produce them really quickly and without a lot of effort. Now, obviously, we could have sent out the CAD drawings in Kilkenny and got them rendered professionally and all that, but it was time-consuming and expensive. And when we got them back and found it didn't work, it would have been a lot of wasted effort. Whereas we can do it in a morning now on Waterford and increases our confidence greatly. And those are the 2, I'd say, big gains that we've had in the architectural services from switching to BIM. The time it's saving us is wonderful, the time it gives us to redesign, and the confidence it gives us that our design is working and that what we're doing is what we want to do. So that's all I want to share with you today. Thank you.